Welcome to In the Lab, a podcast from Luminate, the leading provider of data and insights for the entertainment industry. I'm Andrew Wallenstein, Chief Media Analyst with Luminate Intelligence.
Hello, welcome to In the Lab, a podcast from Luminate, the leading provider of data and insights for the entertainment industry. I'm Audrey Schomer, Media Analyst and Research Editor at Luminate Intelligence. In this episode, we're talking with Dave Davis, Chief Content Officer at Protege Media. Dave was early to the nascent but growing licensing market for AI training data. He founded Calliope Networks in early 2024 as a startup aggregating and licensing audiovisual works to license to AI companies for generative model training. And Calliope was acquired last year by Protege in December. So today we'll be talking about the state and future of content licensing for AI training, and in particular for video content. Hi, Dave. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Audrey, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So maybe just to start, it would be great just to hear a little bit more about your personal background, how you got into this business, and what Protege Media is doing.
Sure. So my background, I started my career at Goldman Sachs on Wall Street. I actually went to law school after that and practiced law for a couple of years in Silicon Valley. I didn't love being a lawyer, and at some point, my wife and I moved to Los Angeles, and I started an entertainment industry career. I've been mostly in content licensing and distribution, with roles at Universal, Paramount, and 20th Century Fox in particular, a couple of other things as well. So in late 2023, started scoping out what became Calliope Networks, which I think was one of the very first companies really dipping its toe into this licensing space. We were told by many at that time that this will never be a business, that this is emphatically, fair use, and so on and so forth. And I'm really proud and pleased that that's really not the case. We were at the end of 2024, as you mentioned, we were acquired by Protege, and that's really an example of 1+1 = 3. It's been tremendously successful to combine the skill set that I and my team at Calliope brought. We knew a lot about and know a lot about content licensing and some of the legal concerns that need to be considered for that. But we didn't know much about things that the team at Protege was really good at, data science, engineering, product, privacy, et cetera. So it's really been it's been a great mix. The Protege team is an all-star team. We've got phenomenal founders. We've got a bunch of PhDs in the business. It is a team that it's very smart. It's a nice group of people, and it's a team that really works hard. So it's been a fantastic combination. The last thing I'll say, just from a scale standpoint, we now work with well over 100 media companies. We can talk more about that as we talk today. We have deals with many or most of the big AI companies, and with a lot of small ones too.
I think maybe just to get us started, how specifically for video, we know that AI models need a lot of training data. These are multimodal models, oftentimes, so that the data that they need spans all different kinds. But specifically for video, how are AI companies using that as training data to build their generative models, and what kinds of systems are we really talking about?
Yeah, so models. So for generative video models, and for any video model, there's sort of three important, call them phases of training. One is pre-training, another is reinforcement learning, and the last is fine-tuning. For pre-training, these models need tonnage. They need a lot of video content to understand the world and to understand physics. If a model has never seen a squirrel, it can't reproduce a squirrel when somebody types in that they want, to create a squirrel on roller skates. So pre-training deals tend to be deals for a lot of diverse content, diverse, by genre, ethnicity, location, subject matter, et cetera. Reinforcement learning is more about human interaction with a model to rank or evaluate the outputs. That might be used for safety training or to reduce bias or things like that. And then the fine tuning phase is where you get into really specialized training. So some models after pre-training, they might be really good at some things and really bad at other things. Say, I had an AI filmmaker say to me the other day, sort of exasperated. He said, "Why can't I just get a model to show a person hanging up the phone?" So hey, that's a need, and that's potentially something that we could address by going through our corpus of hundreds of thousands of hours of content and finding thousands of examples of people hanging up a phone, and would allow the model to train. We have worth mentioning, and we'll talk about it more, I'm sure. We've invested in a lot of technology to enable really deep curation of content so that we can, if AI models, if they do just need shots of people hanging up the phone, we can go find that and deliver them thousands of examples.
Okay. And maybe what's the actual content that you're aggregating from content owners, and what makes good video training data among the different kinds of video that content owners might have?
So broadly speaking, generative video models, they will often tell us that they want cinematic content as one example. But basically what they want movement, they want things that are well lit, they want pretty crisp image capture. They don't want visual artifacts. They don't want on-screen graphics and subtitles. They don't want a shaky camera. So they will tell us they want cinematic, but they don't really want all cinematic. They don't, horror movies don't work particularly well for AI training because the scenery tends to be dark. There's often, a shaky camera to build tension, et cetera. So, but we license all kinds of data. We have all kinds of video. We have, we have scripted movies and TV shows. We have a lot of sports. We have news content. We have, wildlife videos, on and on. It really depends. Different models specialize in different things, and so they may want different slices of all of those categories.
Okay. And is the most of it that you're licensing films and TV content? And it sounds like it's scripted and non-scripted, or nonfiction content. And is it oftentimes that it's the finished work, or is it more often unused footage?
So yeah, so all of the above. So we have a lot of scripted, we have a lot of unscripted. The unscripted can be anything from, a talk show to, to documentaries or, documentary series or movies. And absolutely, we have a lot of B-roll and other footage, raw footage that's not used in the final cut. And some models really want the finished works, and some models, depending on what they are training, they may prefer the raw footage. If you want to be able to reproduce, an elephant taking 45 seconds to walk to a water hole, you're not going to get that in a wildlife documentary, because there are going to be lots of cuts along the way. But the raw footage, you'll have it. So there's long context learning that can be really useful derived from raw footage.
Right. I would think also, not to mention that there's lots of different kinds of editing treatments, coloring and other things that get lighting, that gets applied after the fact, after the footage is actually captured in the real world. Is that something that
Yeah.
comes up? That would be interesting.
So increasingly, I think the models they're trying to understand some human artistic decisions for sure.
Yeah. Okay. And what goes into actually building a data set or putting it together such that it can be used to train a model? And what has been your approach to building those data sets? And has that approach actually changed over time?
So it has changed over time. Going back to the beginning of 2025, which is now a long time ago. It's really not a long time ago. It was all about pre-training data sets. So we were building, massive catalogs of, thousands of hours of stuff in a selected but tended to be a very broad range of content. Now it's evolving much more towards fine tuning. There's still a lot of each, but more and more, the direction of travel is to more curated data sets. So I mentioned that we've developed a product that we call Shot, which we use in-house technology and an AI model to be able to go search for really specific things that an AI model may need and may want to license. So again, if they want a lot of if they want examples of wind through a lion's mane, if they want examples of water or smoke or flags blowing, we can go find exactly that at scale and quickly. And when AI models want examples of that, they tend not to want one or five or 10. They may want 1,000. So the other nice thing is, as a content owner, that curated selection of shots can be sold at a much higher price. We're finding needles in haystacks at scale, and so instead of charging a relatively low price per minute, we can charge a much higher price for an individual shot, which might only be 10 seconds long.
Okay. I mean, you're mentioning sort of wind through a lion's mane. Does it get really that granular, like that specific in terms of the kinds of things that people are looking for? Or is that just a whimsical example?
It's a whimsical example, but it can get pretty granular.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. Do they say why they're looking for such specific or specialized things in a data set at volume?
So they usually don't. So most of the AI companies they're pretty confidential. They don't want their competitors to know what they're training, and this is all cutting edge research at most of these companies. So they hold their cards pretty close to the vest. But based on the requests that we're getting, and again, we have a data science team in-house, we have a pretty good idea of what people are trying to develop.
Yeah. Okay. Um, and is there anything you can tell us about how the deals, the training licenses themselves have been structured in general? Anything about the deal terms and if that has changed over time?
Yes and yes. So from a pricing standpoint, which people are always interested in, there are probably three price structures that are most common. The first, when we're talking about pre-training deals and just massive tonnage of video, that's typically paid on a flat fee basis, typically paid all up front. There's a second model that more and more people are talking about. We have one deal that is on this basis. It's called attribution, where, like the name suggests, when there is an output, there is a calculation done by the model to attribute how much of different movies or TV shows went into the generation of that output, and then that underlying content is attributed a percentage of the revenue, and they get royalties for that. That's, to my view, pretty experimental, but pretty interesting insofar as it gives the potential for long-term ongoing revenue, which I think is something that that when I was on the content side, we would always want. And then the last model I mentioned, sort of these very specific curated individual shots, which are also paid on a flat fee basis, typically upfront. But again, you're talking about higher price points per shot. Other deal terms, just of note, the right that we talk about is worldwide AI training rights. So we do think that you need worldwide rights for this. I'd say that's subject to some debate. I think we've erred to the side of being conservative on that. But so we like our rights holders to have worldwide rights and be able to provide this AI training right. And then you mentioned, have any deal terms changed? I think they've all changed. One that I'll highlight is the license period, or as we call it, the training period. So the amount of time that a researcher can interact with the video content. That when we started in this business, a lot of the AI companies told us emphatically that these licenses had to be in perpetuity. And as a lot of your audience is going to know, that really doesn't work well for movie distributors, TV companies, et cetera. So we spent a lot of time explaining that to AI companies, educating them, and sometimes arguing with them. And we're really proud that we were able to move the needle. So three of the largest AI model builders in particular, their first ever, they told us their first ever non-perpetual deals were deals with us. So we got them across the line. I believe that it was their first, given how hard they fought and how much legal work went into it. We're pretty proud of that. So it is an example that through engagement, through content owners leaning in, we're able to bend the curve a little bit in favor of copyright.
So, to the extent that licensing is happening with AI companies, it's happening a bit behind the scenes and quietly. So, I mean, of course, you're aware of the deals that you've done, but from where you sit in the space, how robust is the market today, and where do you think it's headed? How do you think it's going to grow in the next year or so?
Yeah, so it's pretty robust. Of course, we're really optimistic it's going to grow dramatically. And I think, there are research reports of, really impressive CAGRs and growth rates on the training data market. Um, our business is strong. Our business is growing. I can't reveal a lot of deal metrics and revenue metrics and things like that, but I can say that based on those metrics, we closed a Series A financing in August for $25 million. So investors were able to see behind the curtain and saw really good trends. Where it's headed, we think it's going to continue to grow very, very strong, in part because of these large model builders, but in part because there's so many smaller AI companies and a small AI company is one that's only raised 50 or $100 million. But there's a lot of those. Probably every 2 weeks, a deal comes in to Protege, or we source a deal with a company that I really hadn't heard of a month ago. So it's moving very quickly. I think the evolution, again, as we talked about, it'll evolve more towards fine-tuning data sets and more curation, where technology and pre-processing is really important. Probably evolve to more to multimodal data sets where you're combining, video plus a transcript, or video plus other data related to that video.
Okay. I mean, for an AI company, from their point of view, and not necessarily like when I hear of fine tuning, it's oftentimes from a content owner's perspective that they might be interested from, internally in fine tuning on their own assets. Those could be, franchise specific assets or things like that, to put into production, which creates its own complications around, right? But in thinking about an AI company, what oftentimes happens from a fine tuning perspective?
So
Where they're licensing data from you.
So they come to us again for really specific curated things, presumably to
Yeah.
solve for gaps and things that their models don't do very well today.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, I mean, when you talk with content owners, there's obviously a few different approaches that content owners have taken regarding generative AI. One is lawsuits, but the other is licensing. There have been a spate of licensing deals over the last few years as well. So what are the reasons that you give when you talk to content owners of why they should consider licensing?
So we talk to a lot of content owners. I talk to content owners, every day, and many are worried that by entering into licensing with AI companies, they're going to, in some way, feed their own demise. Um, the reality is that a lot of their content is already being used for training without a license, and to the extent that their business is going to be disrupted by AI, I would argue that is either going to happen or isn't going to happen, and entering into a license or not entering into a license isn't going to appreciably change that. So and that's for better or worse. I don't say that casually. Like, I think AI is going to be incredibly disruptive for the economy generally, and for the entertainment industry in particular. And again, I come from the entertainment industry. I'm sensitive to that. I genuinely have friends who were just laid off from Paramount a week ago. So the disruption is painful, but the disruption is inevitable. When Gutenberg invented the printing press, that was disruptive to scribes. That is the story of technology, and I think we need to uh, live in that reality, and understanding that, make our choices based on that. In that context, where AI is inevitable and where a lot of an individual content owner's content is already being used for training, I think content owners have three choices. They can ignore the situation, they can sue somebody, or they can license. Ignoring doesn't seem like a great business strategy. Litigation might be for some. It's obviously expensive and time consuming. What Protege is all about, we specialize in licensing. So for companies that want to engage, and by engaging, help to change some of the business terms, give content owners a seat at the table, obviously benefit from monetization. That's our role, and we're really pleased that more than 100 media companies have come along with us on that journey. Just a side note that because of various copyright law cases, the part of the fair use test, at least according to an old case called Texaco, is that if content can be commercially obtained, it is less likely to be found to be fair use. So by our mere existence and by making it possible to license content, we strengthen everybody's copyrights. And we're really proud of that.
So we know that a lot of AI companies have claimed the fair use defense in those copyright infringement lawsuits that many content owners have brought. And Luminate actually ran a survey earlier this year that highlights some of that challenge around AI replicas, where we found that 37% of US generative AI users had intentionally replicated the style of a specific artist in an AI image, and 24% had done it for a video. So this really, I think, points to the merits of some of the complaints that copyright owners have brought, where there's value that AI services are getting from the content that they've ingested on the fair use premise, and we see that because it's part of the user activity in engaging with those services. So from thinking about the outcomes of some of the lawsuits that we've seen in recent months and weeks this year, what would your sense be of the impact on the licensing market and the need for AI developers to license or not necessarily?
Yeah. So there's been, big developments, the Bart's case, the Kadri case, now this Udio settlement is really interesting. It feels like a lot of companies that have traditionally been pretty vocal about fair use are leaning into licensing more than before. They would never say to us that, hey, we're doing that because we're worried about litigation and liability, but it's certainly plausible. The Anthropic settlement was, Anthropic faced $1 trillion of potential damages and settled for $1.5 billion, which is the largest copyright settlement in US history. So one can imagine that got the attention of people. I think the Udio settlement is really interesting. So, for those who don't know, Udio and Universal Music Group was suing Udio, a big generative music service, and they just settled, I think, last week. And as part of the settlement, Udio agreed to build a fully licensed generative music service that'll be subscription-based. Presumably, there's an agreed, licensing term. There are agreed licensing terms with Universal Music Group, and rumor has it that that companies like Sony Music and Warner Music would be soon to follow. Although I certainly have no inside information on that. But that's a really exciting model, and were that perpetuated across the AI ecosystem, that'd be really interesting. One other thing that I think is worth mentioning that people forget is we spend so much energy talking about fair use and US copyright exceptions. This is a global issue, and the US is only one market. It's a really important market, but it's only one market. The European Union has something called text and data mining exception, which is much narrower than fair use. Australia, I think, just announced that there are no exceptions to its copyright law relative to AI. And there was I recall seeing there was a big decision in favor of copyright owners in Germany, I think, in the last week.
Yeah.
It all goes to the point that it is much easier to just sign a license agreement for global training rights than to try to thread the needle by finding exceptions in 100+ copyright regimes. including fair use. And fair use is, is fact specific in each case in the US. So for those who think there's going to be a court case that is going to sort of decide fair use once and for all and have a bright line rule, it's unlikely to be so in the United States.
Thinking about studios, of course, this year we've had two lawsuits from major studios, but no major studio, at least publicly, has engaged in a licensing deal with an AI company, like the ones that you're engaged with. And I think, based on conversations that I've had with various people, there's complexity in it for a studio for scripted content because naturally movies and TV shows are collaborative works. They're sort of bundles or of third-party rights that were signed at the time that the film was created and distributed. Even though the work as a whole is of course owned by the studio to do with. And so in thinking about the deals that you're doing with content partners, how are you specifically thinking about some of those complexities related to underlying rights contained in some of that content?
Good question. So the first thing we tell our partners and potential partners is not to take legal advice from us. So I'll say that for this podcast. Content owners need to work through those rights and those issues and get comfortable that they have the necessary rights to engage in this business. But a couple of specific considerations. We have tried to think pretty deeply about how to make this a feasible business and take rights holder considerations on board. One is around music. So you've got a movie, it has music. Music rights are really complicated. We, from the early days of Calliope Networks, made a decision that in general, unless we had the rights, we just carved that out. So music may be provided in a file, but it is not licensed for training. Similarly with the right of publicity. So with a person's face or their voice, models may train on generally what people look like and how they walk and what they sound like when they talk. But to reproduce an individual human being without their express consent is generally number one against the law in the state of California and probably a number of other places, but would also violate our agreements.
Okay. In practice, does that mean requesting guardrails in the actual contract that you're doing with the AI company?
Yeah, so we have in our standard form, we have a variety of use restrictions that limit the ability of models to paint outside of those lines.
Some people have talked about the possibility of synthetic data increasingly being used to train AI models. So, do you think that synthetic data actually poses a threat of some kind to human-created data for training? And could that be a potential limiting factor for the licensing market?
Yeah, there's a lot of hand-wringing over synthetic data. It doesn't. Synthetic data as a competitive threat doesn't concern me really at all. In the AI research world, they talk a lot about synthetic data and the risk of model collapse. So if you feed a model on outputs that are generated from that model, the model will tend to perpetuate its own biases even more. And there's this thing that they call model collapse. The requests that we get, interestingly, increasingly ask for content that is unpolluted by AI. AI companies, they want real world data that they know is the ground truth. I read an article a couple of months ago that talked a little bit about this and suggested that audiovisual content that was produced before, call it 2025, would actually be viewed for a long time as sort of premium quality training data because there was no risk that it was polluted by AI elements.
Yeah.
So broadly speaking, there will be a lot of synthetic data used for training. I don't, from what I've read, and again, I'm not a data scientist, but I don't think there's any risk that it supplants the need for real world data.
Yeah, Interesting. So I think we can end on this question, which is, what do you see as, I mean, of course, you're a little biased, but what do you think is
Right.
the benefit of working with a data broker, a data set licensing company like Protege? And what's the specific expertise that you bring that a media company trying to do this directly on its own would not?
Yeah, so we work with, some of our partners are pretty large, sophisticated media companies. None are major Hollywood studios, but some are pretty sophisticated companies, and we have this conversation a lot. There's a few things that I think we bring to the table. One is just, we have a lot of deal flow, right? So that gives us sort of unique expertise on the market, on legal terms, on pricing, et cetera. That is beneficial. Um, Another is we get a wide variety of deals from a wide variety of customers. So maybe, a media company is aware of and even has relationships with um, the 5 or 6 largest AI companies. But there are hundreds of smaller AI companies that are working on audio conversational models, that are working on VFX applications, on dubbing, even on things that aren't related to video at all, like robotics actually trains on video. Um, we get deal flow across all of that, and so I think there's a world where a major media company says, you know what, let me handle these 2 or 3 partners, but you guys handle the rest, sort of for the long tail. A third thing is, from a technology standpoint, it's not trivial to do these deals. So especially as we get into fine tuning, so the necessity to be able to essentially leverage AI tools to curate really specific shots across a huge corpus and get really curated, that's costly and time consuming. Took us a while to build. Um, that's now something that we can deploy very easily. This also creates the opportunity for, if to the extent there's a media company that is concerned about making its whole catalog available to AI, but is open to monetizing specific slices of their catalog, not full length movies, but pieces and parts of those movies. Um, that becomes an interesting model that I think would be hard for an individual media company to duplicate.
Yeah.
Um,
Has there been interest on that kind of small application? Not small. Yeah. Has
th-
there been interest in doing that by any media companies coming to you,
yeah,
wanting to basically
there
splice up
is.
their own movies? Yeah.
Yeah, there is. We're in conversations with a handful of pretty large media companies about that as, an alternative, maybe as almost a pilot to start, and then they can get a little more comfort and get more knowledge, and the market will evolve, and then maybe in 6 months or a year they come in a bigger way. But I think it's a really interesting starting point.
Yeah.
A couple of other things I'll mention. Obviously we bring a lot of legal expertise. The whole team has a lot of knowledge. I'm a member of the Copyright Society. I'm an inaugural member of its AI subcommittee, where I sit, on this subcommittee alongside some of the most important legal minds around the space, the people who are litigating the cases you mentioned, people who work at some of the AI labs, et cetera. So that gives me the ability to see around some corners that might not be obvious. And then the last thing I'll say is um, we're a startup and we hustle like crazy, and I think that's not to be undersold. This is, again, I spent most of my career working at Universal and Paramount and at 20th Century Fox with really talented teams, and I think we worked really hard and really effectively. But the pace that we turn things around at Protege, really led by our management, by our founder, Bobby Samuels, and by Travis May on our board, is remarkable.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what we have time for today. Dave, thank you so much for joining us, and this was all really interesting. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Audrey.